Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you some basic ways to work with layer mask adjustments to selectively darken, lighten, or otherwise alter specific parts of your image. So I have an image here, and in this image you'll notice that the foreground looks reasonably good, but the background, the sky here, could really come in a bit more. The sky's a little bit washed out. So what I'm going to do is make an adjustment so that I can darken the sky and leave the rest of the image as it is. Now there are two ways that I can do this, actually probably more than two ways, but two ways that I'm going to show you in this video. And the first is to make a very simple layer mask adjustment. So I'm going to click on my adjustments tab here so that I get a new layer adjustment. And you do need to make an adjustment layer in order for this to work. And I'm going to, in this instance, why don't I use a curves adjustment? And in making the curves adjustment, I again want to darken the sky. So I'm going to use the tat tool. That's the targeted adjustment tool within the curves. And I'm going to stay in my RGB channel. That's my red, green, and blue channels together. That means it'll affect all the channels of the image. And I'll click on the tat and then click here in the sky, and I'm going to click and drag down so that I pull the curve down and darken the sky. Now I'm going to overdo it just for the purposes of making it very clearly visible here. I wouldn't actually make this adjustment quite so aggressively, but I think you get the basic gist of it. And maybe I could even pull my highlights panel down just a little tiny bit more and adjust the overall sky just a bit more. Okay, so maybe something like that. Okay. Now that I have that adjustment made, I don't actually like what it's doing to the foreground of my picture, but I do like what's happening here in the sky. You'll notice that I have a curves adjustment sitting here on top of my background actual pixel-based picture layer. And if I click that on and off, you can see the before and after. Now you can see the sky is really coming in here, but obviously I've darkened the foreground far more than I would ever want the foreground to be darkened. Within the adjustment layer, there is a built-in layer mask. That's this box right here. And the thing to remember about layer masks is that with a layer mask, black hides and white reveals. So any part of the layer that is, or any part of the layer mask that's black will be hiding the adjustment or the pixels beneath it, and anything that's white will be revealing those pixels or that adjustment. So in this case, I'm going to paint with black in my layer mask to block out this adjustment so you can't see it in this bottom portion, but so that you can see it up here. The first step is I want to make sure that I'm working in the layer mask, and you'll notice there's a little bit of a box highlight around this layer mask, which shows that that's the active part of the adjustment. I haven't clicked on this. You'll see the boxes around that. I want to make sure I click here and show that as being active. Now I'm going to use my default colors. I can hit the letter D to give me my default black and white swatches, and then I can hit the X to switch them back and forth, and that's the D and the X on the keyboard, by the way. And I'm going to make black my foreground color because if I paint with black, that will hide the layer mask. And then I've selected the paintbrush tool, and I have kind of a big soft brush, and I'm going to paint that big soft brush over this area. So again, I have the curves adjustment layer here. I'm working in the layer mask and I'm painting with black. And as I paint over this bottom portion, you can see that that adjustment is being hidden from the bottom portion of my image, but revealed in the top portion of my image. And I would probably be a good idea to zoom in a little bit more closely and to get this edge a bit more perfectly here. But for the purposes of demonstration, I think this works just fine. So you can see here that the top of my image has darkened down and the bottom of my image has remained the same. That's because I've hidden the layer mask on the bottom half of the image by painting it with black. Now another way that you can do this is by adding a gradient fill. And to do that, you'll do a very similar thing. I'm going to turn this layer mask adjustment off and I'm going to make a new adjustment. So I'll go under my adjustments tab, and perhaps this time I will do it with the levels adjustment, and I'm going to do the same thing. My purpose is going to be to darken my image overall. So I'm using my levels and I'm moving my midtone slider and I'll move my shadow slider over, and again I'm being aggressive, but I'm just trying to darken this top half of my image. Again, you can see here that I have the levels adjustment in this case. That's darkening the whole image. But you can see that this white layer mask indicates that that adjustment is being equally laid over my entire image. Now, what I'm going to do now is do what's called a gradient fill. So again, I have the layer mask selected. I have my default colors of black and white selected here. And this time I'm going to go to my gradient tool. That's right here. If you don't see your gradient, it might be hidden under your paint bucket tool. So you can click on this and hold it down and go to the gradient tool. Now the gradient tool will apply a gradient here within your layer mask, and I'm just going to click and drag it just so you can see. And you'll see that in this case I laid black on the top and white on the bottom. I did actually the opposite of what I would want to do ultimately, and you can see that it creates a blended fill from top to bottom of my layer mask. Now I don't like it that way. I actually want to reverse it so that the black's on the bottom and the white's on top, and in order to do that I'll do a Command Z, that's an edit undo, and instead I'll pull from the bottom straight up to the top, and you'll see that it blends in. You see here it goes from black to white, that adjustment. The further up I pull my cursor, the further up that adjustment will move into my image. So I might actually pull it up quite far so that it blends it in a bit more. And in this case, you end up with a little bit more of a graduated adjustment. The foreground is left completely alone. The middle ground is about a half adjustment, and the top is fully adjusted. And you can decide which of those looks you prefer. This is what the gradient fill would look like, and this is what a simply painted in top would look like. And depending on your image, one or the other might be preferable.